Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I'm here with a solo pod for you today. We're going to go over the Jags game. We're going to move on to the Titans game after we're done with the Jags game. So, lots to talk about today. Obviously, with the up and down performance, we'll say, from the Vikings against the Jaguars. Pretty frustrating game from an offensive perspective. Obviously, a really awesome game from a defensive perspective, but even though the offense moved the ball pretty well overall in the game, they got in the scoring position, what was it, like 6 or 7 times? A pretty crazy number. Weren't able to put up the points because of the major mistakes, so we'll kind of cover all of that, right? And I think, the getting into the offense first, if you look at it from a high level kind of overall perspective, like this team still understands how to move the ball. I think the way the Jags were playing on defense really helped prevent any sort of deep down the field shots that the Vikings wanted to take. I mean, it seemed like any time Darnold was trying to throw like 10 plus down the field, the ball ended up getting intercepted, right? And then that was kind of going in Jefferson's direction. There wasn't a whole lot available to the receivers in this game. And I think that was a product of the way the Jags were playing defense. So I think kind of what the Jags took is that the Vikings like to attack the intermediate middle of the field. Like that's where they get all of their chunk plays over the course of the game, right? They like to attack that intermediate to deep middle of the field. They also like to attack up the seams, like on the post route to Addison, that was kind of picked, and that sort of thing. And the Jags basically said, okay, we're going to double Justin Jefferson or have safety help over Justin Jefferson all game. We're going to try to flood those intermediate zones and make Sam Darnold check down time after time after time. And, it worked on very long, extended drives. It was kind of interesting because they kept talking during the broadcast about how I believe the Vikings actually had like the fewest 10 plus play drives in the NFL coming in to this game, even if they were good offense. And the Vikings ended up with like 4 10 plus play drives. They had the 17 play drive that ended in the interception. And a number of other drives that were extended where they were converting multiple third downs, getting deep into Jaguars territory, right? They weren't able to put it together in the red zone. Obviously, Sam Darnold had the turnovers, and I'll get to breaking those down kind of individually as plays. So it ended up being a frustrating day with low scoring from the offense, but I think you can take away that they moved the ball pretty well, right? Against an admittedly really bad Jags team. Like, this was one of the worst defenses in the NFL coming into the game, as I kind of talked about. So even the way they were able to perform in terms of holding the Vikings for 12 points is probably a win for them. But if you look at some of the underlying stuff, I mean, I think it's kind of self-inflicted wounds with the turnovers from the Vikings that really led to the low point total. Once the Vikings actually got into scoring position, just because of how quickly they were able to move the ball. So I kind of just praised the Jaguars for flooding the middle of the field, but one of the things I wanted to talk about is that the Vikings did have misses on chunk plays over the middle of the field as well. And in some of these instances, this is like tight coverage, right? So I don't want to be like, oh, the Jags didn't really do a good job, doing it, but just some things that popped out to me. I think on the first drive of the game, the Vikings ended up getting down in the scoring position, and Addison is wide open in the seam on a route where he's running vertical. It's like it's a 3-person bunch concept, and I believe Addison was the third inside, and he's just tasked to run a vertical route. To me, he was a little slow getting out of that route. There was kind of press technique from the corner who was up against him, so he just didn't get into the vertical portion of his route quickly enough, and Darnold's ball ended up high over his head, right? So he has to try to jump up into the air for it. It's past his overstretched fingers. And honestly, I don't think that throw was on Darnold. I think it was Addison who kind of disrupted the time of the throw and did not get vertical quickly enough to be able to get up and make that play. There was another play which might have been the same drive, and even a little bit earlier in the drive, it might have been on the very next drive, where TJ Hockenson had a deep over, and actually Mark Sanchez, I think, did a pretty good job of highlighting this one on the broadcast, where he's running an over route across the field, and Sam Darnold is just late to throw it. So you see him come open. There's a window between the linebacker and the corner who is kind of towards the sideline. Darnold lets it go a little bit too long, starts to throw it towards the sideline, and allows the cornerback into the play. If he lets the ball go about half a beat earlier, I think he has Hockenson with space. Maybe you can sit him down a little bit, have him fall down, and it's like a 15+ yard gain. That's a nice chunk, and you're moving the football. So that was another near miss that we had in the first half, and then there was another deep in or crosser to Addison that I thought was a miss. The ball ended up high. Fortunately, didn't get picked, right, where it wasn't in harm's way. But he was open over the middle of the field, in that 15 to 20 yard range, and he just missed him, right? I think if you go back and look at the Hockenson play, there's a little bit of Sam Darnold needs to step up pretty aggressively in the pocket because there was a little bit of a soft edge from, I think, O'Neill's side. I don't remember, sorry, offhand. But, it wasn't like the worst pass protection in the world. Darnold stepped up pretty aggressively. He probably could have shortened how he stepped up in that instance and gotten rid of the ball like half a tick sooner. And if you get rid of the ball half a tick sooner, it probably doesn't allow the corner to get back into the play, right? So there's a little bit of coordination there between Darnold and his pass protection. And I thought in the first half, it was kind of up and down from a pass protection perspective when the Vikings wanted to go deep. One of the first third downs of the game, right, was honestly a really nice scramble from Darnold where he ends up finding Justin Jefferson coming across the field. Darnold had to scramble in that play because Cam Robinson got completely run over by Josh Hines-Allen. And it wasn't even a situation where, like, Robinson fell backwards because he tripped over the foot of a lineman. He just lost leverage completely and got knocked over backwards, kind of into the quarterback's area. So that was a pretty nasty loss that Robinson took. I would say, I don't think that the kind of loss is necessarily going to be a systemic issue, but Ed Ingram also had problems, particularly against Eric Armstead when he was healthy in the game. Like, there were a couple high-profile losses that Ingram had that I thought either affected throws or, made Darnold kind of have to move around in the pocket a little bit. So I thought that early on in the first half was probably a little bit of an issue. I think it also caused the Vikings to go to a little bit more quick game. So just to my eye, there was a lot more quick game in this game for the Vikings. And in some instances, I think it was a very good thing. You saw a lot of the TJ Hockenson targets, particularly on third down. And I'll get a little bit deeper into the TJ Hockenson targets later because I thought that I'll call it the TJ Hockenson drive, right? He converted a ridiculous number of third downs on that drive. But, there's a lot more. Darnold's hitting the top of his drop. He finds, and it's like a 3-step drop, he finds a receiver pretty quick on an out or something, that's a lot shorter down the field, probably within the 0 to 10 yard range than what you would see from the traditional Vikings offense where they're attacking deeper down the field. So I think they saw that kind of off coverage from the Jags and did a pretty good job of adjusting on offense, and it's what allowed them to move the ball throughout the course of the game. So I was pretty happy with the additional quick game. Obviously, with Cam Robinson in there instead of Christian Darrisaw, you're going to have a couple blemishes in pass protection, or more blemishes in pass protection than you would with one of the best left tackles in the game. And again, that's not to slate Cam Robinson and say I think it was a bad move or he's not somebody who should be out there. I think he's absolutely the best option that the Vikings had on the market at left tackle. It's just, you're not going to find somebody available for trade for the limited amount that we gave up for Cam Robinson, who can play on the level of Christian Darrisaw, right? So most teams run a lot more quick game than the Vikings do, and the Vikings were probably more in line with what we see from a lot of NFL teams in terms of the amount of quick game they ran in this game. And I do think it benefited the offense in terms of the ability to move the ball consistently, because if you want to look at the Vikings overall, they have had issues being consistent moving the ball, right? They either get drives with big chunk plays or they end up running three and outs. They had virtually no 3 and outs in this game, and if I pull it up here real quick, I'll be able to figure out what the Vikings drive range is. So the Vikings had only 2 I take that back. They had one drive when they were trying to run out the clock. That was the 3-and-out. That was the one where Darnold got sacked at the end of it. They only had one other drive, and it was a 2-minute drill drive where they ended up going 3-and-out. So really impressive, consistent offensive output from the Minnesota Vikings in terms of being able to move the sticks and generate first downs, drive after drive after drive in this game. And I think the quick game and the shorter stuff was a benefit to that, and also the ability to run the ball, which I'll get to in a second, where they were consistently in like 2nd and 6, and then it's 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 5 to somewhere in the 3rd and 1 to 6 range, which is a lot easier to convert than when you might have an incompletion on 1st and 2nd down, or a run for negative or no gain on 1st down, a deeper attempt on 2nd down. Now you're in 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11, things like that, and it's a lot harder to convert consistently. So, shout out to the Vikings offense for being able to consistently move the ball. I'm going to get into some of the negatives here in a little bit, but I want to keep going over some of the positives first. I think there was great run blocking from the offensive line, kind of as usual at this point. I think that's basically just what we expect from the Vikings offensive line throughout the course of the season now, is for them to have very good run blocking games. You see so many plays where they just are getting multiple yards of knockback on guys, whether it's a duo run or an inside zone run, which really have become the bread and butter of this Vikings offense, is either running duo or inside zone, kind of between the tackles. There's not a lot of wide or outside zone. You'll see some split zone plays, and they mix in the occasional gap play or two. I think there's a really nice, well-blocked, it was like a counter play for Cam Akers that I was pretty impressed with. I think that Aaron Jones is still clearly the best running back on this team. He gives the Vikings the best opportunity to be successful running the ball. Cam Akers had a couple of decent runs in this game, but he also had a couple of plays where he just missed reads to me, or was slow enough to make reads that it allowed the defensive pursuit to catch up. And I honestly kind of thought this was one of the weakest vision games for Aaron Jones as well. There were a couple plays that I kind of questioned from him in terms of the decision that he made. So it was a little bit across the board, up and down from the Vikings' backs. But I thought the run blocking was great and helped enable their success on the ground. So, they end up running for 169 yards on 43 carries. Sorry, I kind of just pulled that up. So that's a ridiculous number. Obviously, you have some Sam Darnold attempts in there. It looks like Darnold had 7 attempts for 28 yards. But even taking that out, right, that's 36 rushing attempts for something like 140 yards. So, you're not quite hitting the 5 yards a carry clip, but you are, consistently getting chunks and consistently putting the Vikings in situations where they had 3rd downs that they were able to convert. So I liked what I saw from the run game. I liked what I saw from the run blocking. And I think that it's just going to continue to be very good throughout the year. So if I move on from the run game, I'll talk about TJ Hockenson now. That's kind of the last positive bullet point I have from the Vikings in this game. And then I'll get into Sam Darnold a little bit, right? So TJ Hockenson, his second game back from injury, right? Major surgery, the ACL, MCL combination. And the second drive of the game, Sam Darnold just targets him play after play after play. He ends up with 5 first downs on that drive, which is a ridiculous number. He had 5 targets, 4 of which were on 3rd down, and all of them converted for first down. So it's like he's just barely getting past the sticks on every single one of these plays, but it was a phenomenal way to move the football. I think it's pretty interesting that if you look at the 3rd down bunch designs, and I've talked about this a bit in the podcast before, where Kevin O'Connell loves to put 3 receivers to one side of the field on 3rd down, kind of do some sort of motion, either from a bunch formation to some kind of weird 3 receiver stack, or some kind of combination to 3 receivers, or from a 3 receiver formation into a bunch formation on that side, and then have a variety of play calls off of it. One of the ones that I thought was really effective back a few weeks ago was where I think they just had Naylor and Addison and Jefferson on the same side. They basically had Naylor and Addison run vertical routes and then ran Jefferson on an option route. In this game, they ran a similar concept, but they had Hockenson run the option route. And I think there are advantages to having Hockenson do it, especially in a third down situation, because you have so much defensive attention on Justin Jefferson, right? Like the option route worked very well. I think that was in the Texans game that they ended up running that and converting a first down. But that worked really well in that case. But sometimes you're gonna have more defensive focus on Justin Jefferson, and that was certainly the case in this game. So Hawkinson's a bigger body. He's phenomenal at running those option routes. He has a great understanding of what the defense is trying to do, so he can win that leverage very easily and be on the same page as the quarterback because he's making the right decision every single time. And then he's a big body to box out on a catch on third down where you might have a tight coverage space in that area. Again, that's certainly something I trust Justin Jefferson to do, but I love having Justin Jefferson running a more vertical version on that, a more vertical route on that concept, because you have the opportunity, if there's a coverage bust, to hit a bigger play by using Justin Jefferson to go downfield, right? So I think the combination of having TJ Hockenson back that's just something we see with his ability to be added into the offense. There were a couple other situations where one's basically like a stick route or whatever you want to call it, but it's a curl route a little bit down the field, and he just finds a spot in zone, and Darnold's able to hit him. I thought Darnold's throw, honestly, was a little bit late on that one, and this is the one where I think it was the fifth one, right, where he's making these plays, and he's making tough contested catches, taking big hits to the back from defenders, and by the end of it, he just looked like he wanted to lay down and like tap out for a couple plays, right, just because of the massive hits that he was taking. But he finds a little bit of space in the zone. Darnold's able to fire the ball in there, and he's able to make the catch through contact. I think that was the message that you want to take away from TJ Hockenson, is just his physicality and his ability to find spacing and be able to convert those first downs play after play after play on third down. And then later in the game, there was another Y option play where he just breaks in, has one step on the defender, and takes the ball 20 yards with a bunch after the catch, right? So he's matched up one-on-one on the linebacker. That's an advantageous thing for the Vikings. He ends up going inside where the Jags defense doesn't have any inside help on him at all. So he's wide open up the middle, and it's a 20-plus yard game, right? And that was by far Hawkinson's biggest play of the game. But just overall, TJ Hockenson, great second game back. He's still not, probably been a full-time player over these first couple of weeks. I don't think they're using him as a blocker nearly as often as they probably would like to at his peak usage. If I pull it up, Josh Oliver actually had 57 snaps in this game and Hockenson had 39, right? So you see Oliver and Hockenson on the field for a number of overlap, like two tight end sets. But when the Vikings are going 11 personnel and want to have the flexibility to run the ball, they're still keeping Josh Oliver in the game primarily, I would say, which is fine as they continue to work Hockenson back from injury. Obviously, Hockenson is somebody that they're going to make a every down player once he's probably fully healthy and back in the game, right? So with Hockenson, I had a great story there in terms of how he was able to come back and honestly make a huge impact in this game, right? Because while that drive ended in an interception, I think you see the consistent ability to move the ball, and he adds that to this offense, and I think that'll be a boon to the Vikings moving forward. So if I finally get around to the elephant in the room on offense, right, and that's Sam Darnold, 3 interceptions in this game. Not a great game for him. I'll go down the 3 interceptions, and honestly, there was another play that was an interception that ended up getting called back. There was probably 1 or 2 more that could have been interceptions that he looked at that weren't, right? So I talked a bunch about how the offense was able to move the ball efficiently. I think Darnold in those situations was making a lot of good decisions consistently. So I don't want to absolutely kill him and say that he's not a viable quarterback, because I think that the play that we've seen from Darnold this year is relatively sustainable. It's something that we've probably talked a lot about, or Vikings fans at least have talked a lot about, how he's gotten a little bit lucky and has put the ball in harm's way earlier in the season where he didn't get punished for it. Now he's putting the ball in harm's way and getting punished for it, right? So there's a little bit of variance in terms of how much Darnold is actually punished for the decisions that he's making. But at the end of the day, I think generally he's making good decisions. Like, you don't move the ball for 400 yards if your quarterback isn't consistently making good decisions when you have no big explosive plays, right? So like the world where there's not a world where the Vikings don't have any explosive plays. They win the game, right, because the opponent isn't doing that great. Their run game was solid, but it wasn't a elite performance from a run game, and the quarterback isn't generally putting your offense in position to succeed, right? And the throws that are mistakes, I think there is a systemic issue on them that I would love to see the Vikings iron out, but I think ultimately that issue just means that Darnold isn't a top 10 quarterback. He might not be a top 15 quarterback, but he is on the line between, kind of what you like to see in a starter and what you'd like to see in a backup, right? In an ideal world, somebody who's playing like Darnold is, I think, is probably a candidate for a backup quarterback, but I just don't think there are 32 quarterbacks in the NFL who are better than what Sam Darnold provides the Vikings right now. So it's kind of a hard, let's say, nuanced discussion to have of somebody who is making mistakes, needs to get better, but also is playing at a high enough level where it's certainly he doesn't deserve to be benched for Nick Mullins, right? Because if we're complaining about turnovers from Sam Darnold, as much as I am entertained by Nick Mullins, what are we going to complain about when Nick Mullins gets in the game? Instead, he's going to turn the ball over. Nick Mullins is a very aggressive quarterback. Sam Darnold's also a very aggressive quarterback. Like, I think you're seeing the interceptions that he had in this game because he was aggressive. Historically, over the course of the season, he has one of the highest yards per attempt for a quarterback because he's consistently throwing the ball down the field, right? Like, we're not going to get anything with Nick Mullins that we aren't already getting with Sam Darnold, and I think Darnold has executed at a better level than Mullins can just because he's better arm talent than Mullins and is a more mobile player in general. But if I want to get into the specifics of this game, I think there are two things to me that Darnold struggled with. I think he struggled with timing on throws, and I also think he struggled with accuracy. So the timing thing is pretty critical to me because I talked about a TJ Hockenson throw where it was late, right? There were a couple other throws as well. A couple other throws as well that I thought Darnold was late on. I think there was an out to, I want to say, Naylor early in the game where just, the timing wasn't there and it ended up being an incompletion. And a couple other of those plays to Hockenson on that drive where if it's just a step sooner, I think he saves TJ from taking a big hit that he did and kind of having to go out of the game, right? So timing was a little bit of an issue, but the bigger concern to me was accuracy. I thought Darnold sprayed the ball pretty heavily in this game. So if you go to the second interception that Darnold threw, right, he's in the pocket, there's nothing really open, so it becomes a second reaction play where he's trying to move outside of the pocket and make a throw to Justin Jefferson, who's going from right to left, right? So Jefferson's going to his left, and Darnold needs to lead him in the throw, and he just throws the ball behind him. Like, it really was just a complete miss by Darnold. If he leads Jefferson out in front, he has a touchdown on that play. He just missed the throw. If you take a look at the third interception, to me, I think Darnold misses the throw there as well. Sanchez on the broadcast said there were like two kind of ways you could throw the ball and that he thought that Darnold and Jefferson weren't on the same page. To me, when I was looking at it from the all-22 angle, you have a safety capping Jefferson over the top, and he's really the one who's in coverage on Jefferson. I think it was Andre Sisco, right, is the guy who made that pick. but he's got inside leverage over top of Jefferson, so you need to throw that ball to the front pylon low. Jefferson, breaks on an out route. He's heading directly towards the front pylon. If that ball is on the sideline where Jefferson can make a toe tap catch, it's a first down, if not a touchdown. Instead, Darnold leaves the ball inside and high, which I don't think was great ball location at all. I don't really understand why there's a world where you would kind of throw that ball that way. And it's certainly possible that I'm wrong about that, but it's just, I just don't think that was the correct throw for Darnold to make in that situation. So he needs to throw the ball outside. It's just an inaccurate throw or a poor decision. There was earlier in the game a catch by Josh Oliver, which was a phenomenal catch. I think O'Connell challenged it and got it overturned because they initially called it incomplete on the field, where the ball's just low. And Oliver has to go down and make a ridiculous catch to even make that play. There was another Jefferson catch where I think it was on a slant, right, where it was low. He's able to pick it up off the ground and convert a third down. That could have killed a drive if Jefferson didn't go down and make a very nice catch on that play. So just an uncharacteristic, I would say, number of poor throws from Darnold in this game. So hopefully that's something that can get cleaned up week to week. And I think he hurt his hand on the one interception return. So obviously that's something to monitor going forward. I saw he was limited in practice today with a right hand injury, and obviously he's right-handed, so that's his throwing hand. So, a bit of a concern moving forward. I think I'm going to mention, I already mentioned there was a deep over to Addison that he just sailed the throw on. So, it's a variety of misses in this game, and that's certainly a concern moving forward for me with Sam Darnold. So that's kind of the Darnold question to me. So let's move it over to the defensive side of the ball. I think on the defensive side, first of all, I got to give a shout out to the run defense. They were phenomenal all game. I think they did allow two big runs where one, they were a little bit over leveraged. And then on the second one, I think somebody shot the gap early and got out of position. I'm trying to remember offhand, and I'm coming out blank. But really stellar performance across the board. You see big plays from basically all of the interior defensive linemen, right? So that's Bullard, who I thought had a really good game in run defense. Harrison Phillips didn't maybe make as many splash plays in the run game as he normally does to me. But, from an edge rusher perspective, I thought that Jonathan Greenard was blowing up the run all day. There were like 3 or 4 plays, and he wasn't even credited on tackles for all of these, that he just absolutely either collapsed tight end in, and ended up killing the run, basically back into there, or beat a tight end in terms of a block, beat a puller in terms of a block. Just a phenomenal game for him getting into the backfield and kind of making an impact in the run game. Which is interesting because Greenard really didn't have much of an impact in the pass rush game here against the Jags. It was actually, I pulled it up on PFF because I wrote an article on Greenard, Fort Zone coverage this week. You can check it out. But he had 0 pressures, which is the only game he's had 0 pressures the entire season. He only rushed on 19 dropbacks. So it was kind of an interesting combination. Because, the Vikings' best pass rusher was dropping into the coverage a ton. He probably had 8 or 10 snaps where he ended up falling out and dropping into coverage. And I think that was part of the Vikings' rush plan against the Jags, because the Jags did an absolutely awful job picking up linebackers who were blitzing. Cashman got a sack. Pace got a sack. Van Ginkel got a sack off the edge. Obviously, Van Ginkel's an edge rusher, but he's been playing a bunch of off-ball linebacker, doing a little bit of funky, non-traditional things, and they got the Jags on a pressure to get Van Ginkel unblocked, where there's just a miscommunication between the running back and the right tackle on the play. So, it was a lot of, to me, simulated pressures that the Vikings were running that ended up getting advantageous matchups for players, right? So, on a simulated that the Vikings might run, maybe they put 6 guys on the line of scrimmage, right? The old Mike Zimmer double A gap look. The offensive line has to define the threats that they won't block, right? You only have 5 offensive linemen on a play, so those guys want to define across the board the 5 guys that they're blocking. Usually you want to do big on big, right? I don't want a running back tasked to block Jonathan Greenard. I don't want a running back tasked to block a defensive tackle like Harrison Phillips just because of the massive size mismatch in that scenario. So I'm going to ask that guy to block an Ivan Pace or a Blake Cashman. And then when the Vikings get that one-on-one defined matchup, they trust their guy like Ivan Pace to win and get a sack on Mac Jones, which he did. I think Pace was actually unblocked on the sack that he got. Or Blake Cashman to pick on a stunt and have the offense not pick it up. It worked multiple times. It was the sack. It worked for the sack. It worked for the other sack that Cashman got that obviously he got negated because he grabbed Jones's face mask. But like there was just a ton of great simulated looks and pressure stuff that the Vikings did in this game. I mean, to me, the Jags running backs were abysmal in pass protection. I think it was the Cashman sack where he ended up Travis Etienne tried to block him and just couldn't do it. I think on the Pace sack, Etienne was supposed to block Pace, got caught up somewhere else, didn't even touch Pace, and he kind of came in for a sack. And the Van Ginkel sack, I think it was on Bigsby, who, there was, the Vikings had their kind of traditional 5-man front, right? So it was probably Greenard, Tillery, Bullard, Harrison Phillips, and Van Ginkel all on the line of scrimmage. They had 5 blockers. Maybe they had a linebacker lined up. I don't remember offhand. But on the right side of the line, you had Tillery to block and you had Van Ginkel to block. And both the running back, Bigsby, and the right tackle, Anton Harrison, went for Tillery. Van Ginkel comes in completely unblocked, and it's a sack for the Vikings, right? So really great pressure plan to attack the Jags defense, confuse the Jags defensive backs. I thought it worked really well on defense, and that's part of the reason the Vikings were so successful, right? So we had phenomenal run defense just kind of shutting down what the Jags were trying to do on offense all game. You saw an absolutely horrible success rate from the Jags. They had 2 big runs, I think both by Etienne, and then outside of that, he had 9 carries for 20-something yards. Just really a less than 2 yards per carry performance. Bigsby had 2 carries for 4 yards, right? And the Jags were down most of the game. They didn't have the opportunity to run the ball a whole ton. They didn't possess the ball all that much either because of how effective the Vikings were at moving the football on offense, right? And how long they held the ball for. But it just a credit to the defense for a phenomenal performance overall. I think part of that does come from the Jags just being a bad offense and Mac Jones not being a very good quarterback. I thought they had kind of a number of near misses where they could have completed plays downfield, but there was one where I think it was Gabe Davis wasn't able to get all his feet in bounds, kind of on the sideline. There were a number of throws from Jones that were low, and to be fair on those plays, it was a situation where the Vikings were getting pressure. Jones had to get the ball out quick, and it was imprecise and it wasn't able to work, right? The Vikings are forcing their opponents to make difficult plays, and bad opponents like the Jags are not going to be able to make those difficult plays. The other thing about the Jags is there were just so many throws to the flat, particularly to Evan Ingram in this game, that were not successful at all. They were losing yardage, right? So they didn't really have, to me, an innovative or interesting way to attack the Vikings defense. It was a lot of quick game stuff that just wasn't open, and there were zones that were flooded by the Vikings coverage, right, that weren't being, the Vikings were flooding coverages, right, on the Jags, and they weren't able to find open receivers or create separation within the zone. So it was a really big win, I think, across the board from the Vikings defense. One of the things I liked from a secondary perspective is the Vikings felt comfortable playing man in high leverage situations like 3rd and 4th downs, and were pretty successful in doing that. I think they kind of shut down the Jags when they were running man coverage over the course of this game. So that was nice to see. Obviously, you had 2 interceptions, one by Byron Murphy, one by Cam Bynum. So I'll jump into the Cam Bynum, I'm sorry, the Byron Murphy interception. So it was, I believe, on that play, two-man coverage, and you just had, I'm sorry, it was quarters. So in it, you had, two safeties in the middle field, and in quarters, both Smith and Bynum were playing a little bit more towards the center of the field. So any outside vertical routes are the responsibility of the corners. And really, in quarters, it can kind of play out like man a little bit, and that's kind of what happened on this rep, right, where Byron Murphy started out in press coverage. He's following the receiver vertical, and it's just a stop route that's kind of in the midpoint horizontally, but between the outside corner and the safety. So Murphy's helping with that stop route, right? And he just runs the route for, I think it was Gabe Davis, who was the receiver on that play, and is right there in front of him. Like, there was no way that this receiver was going to win leverage on the stop route based on the coverage that Murphy was playing. So I don't really understand why Jones threw the football there. But, like, that's not Murphy's problem, right? Like, he made a great defensive play to have the coverage to be able to be in position to make the interception, right? So it's great coverage. He ran the receivers around for him. And I think he's been playing at a high level. And obviously, especially getting a ton of turnovers. It was really funny seeing the NFL account tweet out. And, the other Byron Murphy, right, that the NFL account meant to tweet out on the Rookie of the Year tweet, where they accidentally put the Vikings Byron Murphy, who's been in the league for like 6 years now, right? I don't know if they actually, like, thought that the Vikings Byron Murphy was the rookie and is a Rookie of the Year candidate because he has so many interceptions on the season. This was Murphy's, I believe, like, fourth interception this year. So it's been pretty impressive. Yeah, it was his fourth interception. So it's been a very impressive season for him. There are blemishes. There are some up and downs. I would say that's true for all of the Vikings corners. You look at a couple of the plays where the Vikings got beat in this game. I think, to the singular touchdown drive that the Jags had, there was a loss by Stephon Gilmore, but there were also a number of very impressive plays from Stephon Gilmore from a tackling perspective in this game to me. So I really wanted to shout that out because somebody of his age and experience is maybe not somebody or maybe somebody you would allow to kind of take a couple more plays off and want to lower the number of hits that he's taking. But I think he's playing really physically and making great tackles coming up in the run game, coming up in the screen game, coming up in the, kind of short, late throws to the flat, where his physicality is winning and he's making plays on offensive players. So shout out to him. Just shout out to the defense in general, right? So you forced so many 3-and-outs from the Jags, so many opportunities where their drives were just kind of dead on arrival. And, again, a phenomenal defensive performance from the Vikings in this game. So if I flip it over to, sorry, that was a terrible transition there. Looking overall at the Vikings defense, Blake Cashman being back, I think, was a boon in this game. It was a little bit frustrating to me live seeing everybody doom tweet after the second drive where the Jags scored a touchdown, right? Like, I think we need to do a better job of, as a fan base, right? And this is like, I'm trying to speak for a bunch of other people. Like, I'm not trying, well, yeah, I am trying to control your emotions because it annoys me when I see people tweet stuff and then, like, 45 minutes later, it looks completely ridiculous in terms of what you were saying because you're overreacting to what's happening in the moment, right? So, like, on the defensive side of the ball, the Jags had a good drive on that drive. I thought there was missed tackling that was frustrating on that drive, and I kind of tweeted that out. But when you have a singular drive that has that kind of missed tackling and allows a couple plays over the middle of the field, it doesn't mean that every other drive is going to be like that. So I think there's probably a little bit more wait and see that we need to have in an individual game to see how it's going to go. Now, when when the Lions are able to score 3 touchdowns in a row, that's probably an indication that the defense is having a bad game, right? Or going to have a bad game. When the Jags score 1 touchdown and then are completely inept on every other drive that they have in the game, you still feel pretty good about the defensive performance overall, right? Like, I think everybody's very happy coming out of this with the defensive performance. So I guess I would ask just a little bit of patience as we move forward with the Vikings, right? Like, if an opponent hits a couple big plays, it's not the end of the world. Every defense has some plays that are hit against them. Like, you're never going to have a defense that's going to shut out every single team it goes against. You're going to have teams with blemishes. If the Vikings get into the playoffs, like, there's a reason most teams score like 20 plus points in playoff games. It's because offenses are really, really good. So even if you have a defense like the Ravens did last year, the Chiefs are going to be able to move the ball in significant chunks. And like, I just think of the drive where the Ravens were playing really tight coverage, playing really well, and the Chiefs were just doing everything imaginable in that AFC Championship game to be able to convert. You had ridiculous Mahomes throws, things like that. If we look at the 2 games where the Vikings defense was bad, I think it's against 2 of the top offenses in the NFL. Obviously, the Lions are like an absolutely incredible offense and have been a great team so far this year. But if you look at the Rams with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, they're also a great offense that's able to consistently move the football, and they have the quarterback to be able to attack this defense. So I'm not trying to say that the Vikings defense is without blemishes. But what I am trying to say is that the Vikings defense is a really, really good defense, even in the context of they might struggle a little bit against the Lions and the Rams of the world, because we don't have defenses in the modern NFL that can absolutely shut every single team down. Like, the offenses are too good and the rules are too good in terms of being skewed towards the offense that you're not going to be able to stop every single thing that your opponent's trying to do. So I think the Vikings have a really good recipe for success moving forward against the opponents that they're going to have. And in games where the defense isn't able to maybe be the dominant force that they were in this game against the Jags, right, where the defense is absolutely picking the offense up for a bunch of mistakes, you're going to need to ask the offense to kind of take over and pick the defense up where they're having a little bit of struggles. The offense wasn't necessarily able to do that in those 2 games. I mean, I'm not saying I have great hopes of the Vikings offense being able to do that. I think you would need to see kind of a near flawless game from Darnold, which really isn't something that we've seen all season. But I think that's okay. Like, I don't think my expectations for this Vikings team, I guess, and I've kind of gone off the rails here, but my expectations for this Vikings team is not somebody that's going to be a Super Bowl contender, right? I think this is a very good team that's going to make the playoffs and probably, unfortunately, get knocked out in one of the first couple rounds of the playoffs just because they don't necessarily have the level of quarterback play I think you need to go deep into the playoffs. I think this defense is a strong playoff defense. I think the offensive supporting cast is a strong playoff offensive supporting cast, and I think Sam Darnold is a phenomenal value for what the Vikings are getting him, paying $10 million, but I just don't think he can necessarily execute on a consistent level the way that we need him to, the way that all of the other quarterbacks in the NFC, right, who are going to be absolutely massive contract players if they're not already. If you look at a Jalen Hurts or Jared Goff, right, two of the highest paid $50+ million contracts, you look at a Brock Purdy, or even like if the Rams somehow sneak into the playoffs with Stafford, or if Kyler and the Cardinals sneak into the playoffs, like those are some of the best players in the NFL, quarterbacks in the NFL, and they're being compensated that way. Sam Darnold, probably not one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but has been a phenomenal value for the Vikings. So, end of the day, big picture, again, I'm not like all in on this Vikings team, but I'm really having a lot of fun with what they're doing. And I think that's kind of how we should take it this year, is that this is a bonus year, right? This was supposed to be kind of a let's learn about the rookie quarterback that we brought in. Obviously, J.J. McCarthy unfortunately gets injured, and it's turned into a great experience in terms of how well the team is playing outside of the quarterback position, and gives me a lot of hope moving forward, especially if we got the pick right on J.J. McCarthy, right? So maybe that was a little bit of therapy, right? Kind of talking about the Vikings situation here. Hopefully, it was a little bit of therapy for you on the Vikings situation in general, but I will flip it over to the Titans game now. So, on defense for the Vikings, on offense for the Titans, I think Will Levis sucks. I think this is another game where the Vikings defense should force multiple turnovers um, on the Titans because Will Levis is just not a consistent quarterback. He's got a fantastic arm, right? He is somebody we talked about probably heavily in the pre-draft process. I think he's going to take bad sacks, and I think that's a bad, like, holding on to the ball, to me, is a bad recipe against the Vikings team. In a situation where you're holding onto the ball, I think Jonathan Greenard's going to get home very effectively. I think players like Van Ginkel are going to get home very effectively. Maybe we see Dallas Turner, who's kind of ramped up his usage a couple times, is going to get home effectively. And the reason that is true is the Vikings stunt a ton on defense, and those games take a little while longer to open up. So if you have a very efficient quarterback like a Jared Goff who's getting the ball out of the top of his drop, able to find his matchups that he likes and hit the receivers, within the timing of the offense, it's hard for a stunting defense to get there, or it's even hard for a player who's winning straight up in a pass rush to get there, because your pass rush is by nature not going to be as quick as the quarterback getting to the top of his drop and getting the ball out. Like, it's just not possible for a player to do that on a consistent basis. So when you have a player like Mac Jones last week who plays with a little bit of an uncertainty, or like a Will Levis, who's going to hold on to the ball forever, trying to hunt for the big play, not necessarily certain about what he's seeing in front of him, I think that very much benefits the Vikings, right? Like, I don't think Will Levis is going to be able to figure out that the Vikings are dropping from having a bunch of players on long scrimmage into Tampa 2. I don't think he's going to be able to figure out the late coverage rotations to cover 3 or something like that, right? Or identify the difference between when the Vikings are playing 2 high quarters versus 2 high Tampa 2. Right, so it's like I just don't have a lot of faith that he's a good quarterback, and to me, I mean that's a recipe for turnovers for the Vikings. So I'm pretty confident in that side of the football's ability to limit the Titans' offense in general. Now that's not to say there might not be an explosive play, right? I talked about Will Levis's physical talent in his arms, right? So maybe there's a couple of explosive plays. Maybe they get a drive or two in there where they are able to score the ball. But I think on the whole, you're going to see a low success rate output from the Titans in this game. One of the things that's kind of interesting on the Titans is I think they have found a decent run game in Tony Pollard, and I think probably Bill Callahan, who certainly the offensive line coach for a long time. I don't know if he's got the offensive coordinator title or not, but typically those are the kinds of guys that run the run game, and I think he's probably very proficient at that. Obviously, the Browns were great at it for a long time, and he's basically been good at it for wherever he's been across his coaching career, at least since he was like head coach of the Raiders back in the early 2000s, right? But they've put together what I think is a pretty decent run game in Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. When I say an opponent has a decent run game, I think they are going to do absolutely nothing against the Vikings defense. The Vikings, to me, are only really susceptible to the top run games in the league, like the Lions, who have superior blocking talent to what the Vikings are able to put on the field on the defensive side of the ball. I think Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Bullard are such good run defenders, and the way the Vikings play defense is so keyed on stopping the run that it really takes a phenomenal blocking performance from an opposing offensive line like the Lions are able to put out to actually run the ball successfully on the Vikings. So I just don't think the Titans have the offensive line talent to put that out. Now, maybe I end up eating my words if one of these guys breaks a big run on the Vikings, which is a possibility. You can always have a missed tackle and end up getting kind of a large run, or get caught in a blitz. That's bad, and I think that's one of the places the Lions did a really good job. Or if we think about the Niners' successes early in the season, I think that's really where they did a great job. But I just don't see it being successful on a consistent basis. In terms of the receivers on that team, Calvin Ridley is the only one who's worth anything to me. Obviously, they traded away DeAndre Hopkins a couple weeks ago. But I to me, it's not even a situation where I feel like I have to one double Calvin Ridley, right? Where we're kind of bracketing him or put our best player on him. If that's something the Vikings defense wants to do, I don't think Nick Westbrook, Akina, or any of the other targets on the Titans are really going to be able to do anything about that. But at the end of the day, preventing Ridley from going off, I guess, is the Vikings' key to the game. And from a pass perspective, and I don't see there being much opportunity for the Titans to do that. Now, if we flip it over to the defensive side of the ball, I'm a little bit more concerned. I think the Titans have a really good defensive front. Justin Simmons is someone who... I'm sorry, not Justin Simmons. Jeez. Jeffrey Simmons is someone who, probably many people were clamoring for the Vikings to trade for because they believe the Vikings need more interior pass rush, which I would agree with. The Vikings need more interior pass rush, but I just don't think they're going to see the value in trading for a piece to bring somebody in solely to provide interior pass rush, especially from a more nose position, which I believe is what Simmons kind of plays. He's a concern because the Vikings are weak on the interior defensive line, on the interior offensive line, particularly at Ingram and Garrett Bradbury in pass protection, right? We don't need to rehash that concern, but they have been a little bit soft throughout the course of the year. That's not to say that there aren't, the Vikings haven't been consistently pretty good in pass protection, including those two guys, I would say, for most of the season. But when you get a game wrecker like Jeffrey Simmons, you can end up with a Dexter Lawrence game where Ingram, I believe, was absolutely abysmal in week one, or maybe it was Bradbury, or it was maybe the combo, right? That allowed so many pressures to them. And they have Anthony Walker as their defensive coordinator, who came from the Ravens system, so they probably have pretty good ways to deploy simulators and kind of get the matchups that they want along the defensive line there. They have other good pass rush players as well. In addition to Simmons, they have Harold Landry, who I've liked for a long time, right? He's more of a speed rusher archetype. I don't think he does a lot of speed to power or, kind of wins. He doesn't really win with, leverage or the kind of, power that you see from some of the more all-around players. But his speed around the edge is absolutely a concern to me against Cam Robinson, who might struggle with that a little bit just because of his size. I think he's done a pretty good job with how he sets and his ability to counteract that speed from opposing players, but I also don't think we've seen somebody with the burst that kind of Landry has. And Arden Key, who's also an edge rusher, is probably a similar profile as more somebody who's a speed rusher than kind of a power guy. Also on the interior, you have Sebastian Joseph Day, who I think is probably a pretty underrated interior defensive line player from a particular run perspective. But, he kind of reminds me of, and maybe it's just the fact that they have, similar names, but the Bears always used to have, a Roy Robertson Harris or kind of a rotational defensive line piece that always killed the Vikings right back 5-6 years ago. And, Joseph Day was with the Rams. I forget exactly where he was before that, but he's been a solid, kind of rotational interior player as well. So I do think the Vikings are going to be able to run the ball on the Titans. Their edge rushers don't strike me as the most run-focused players in the world. Jeffrey Simmons obviously could wreck the game in either way, but the Vikings, despite being, a little bit rough up the interior from a pass protection perspective, have been phenomenal at getting movement on the interior of the offensive line, with a Bradbury Ingram combo or with whatever combo you want, honestly, like Brandell and Robinson and Bradbury Ingram, I would say are your two most common combos, but you have Ingram comboing with O'Neal, you have Bradbury comboing with Brandell as well, and all of them are able to get consistent push. So feel pretty good about the run game against this Titans defensive front. Have a little bit more questioning about pass protection, but I'm hoping the pass protection aspect won't matter that much because L'Jarius Sneed has been out for weeks for the Titans now, and I don't really think they have a strong secondary outside of that. Amani Hooker has made some nice plays as a safety, but I just don't necessarily believe in the Titans' ability to cover, the Vikings' plethora of receivers with the talent that they have on defense right now. So the Titans are starting Darrell Baker and Jarvis Brownlee at outside corner. I mean, I got to be honest, I don't really know much about those two guys, but that's probably not a good sign for them. It's just, tough with an injury situation, kind of maybe lacking the depth that they hoped they would have there with L'Jarius Sneed, and probably trying to get some younger players in there, see what they have in terms of the youth on defense as a team that's not really all that competitive, right? The Titans are a 2-7 team. They're a 2-7 team ultimately for a reason. So I think the Vikings should be able to move the ball through the air, and we might be able to see a little bit more intermediate stuff if they choose not to mug Justin Jefferson at the line of scrimmage every time, right? Like, that is certainly something that the Jags were willing to do, and it paid off for them because they really weren't calling anything on the defensive side of the ball in terms of all the contact that the Jags had against the Vikings receivers in that game. So if the Titans are willing to do that and the refs, play along with that strategy, they might be able to limit stuff. But I still think that somebody will find a way to get open. The Vikings will be able to consistently move the football against this Titans offense. Now, Sam Darnold throws 3 picks again. Everything I just said is out the window, right? But it's just something that I don't think is going to happen on a consistent basis, right? Like, even in Sam Darnold's, worst seasons in Carolina, the first season in Carolina or with the Jets, he wasn't throwing 3 interceptions every single game. So I think we'll see a little bit more of Sam Darnold being able to consistently move the football, have a couple fewer mistakes in this game, and that leads to a relatively comfortable ability for the Vikings to move the football. They score enough on offense that it kind of keeps the game at an arm's length and keeps Will Levis in catch-up mode. You see some mistakes from Levis over the course of the game, and the Vikings win relatively comfortably in this one. End of the day, again, we just came off of a 3-pick game for Sam Darnold, right? So it's certainly not impossible for him to go ahead and do that again, and the Vikings to struggle to get out of this game. If they allow, a couple big plays, it could turn a 12-7 win into a 14-12 loss or a 14 to something loss, right? Or you get a pick that sets the opponent up in the red zone. Now all of a sudden you get a free touchdown. Basically, the Titans are scoring in the 20s, but I just don't see a high offensive output from this Titans team with the talent that they have on offense. I don't see the defensive ability to consistently stop the run with how well the Vikings offensive line is run blocking right now, and I certainly don't see the ability to keep up with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hockenson, and Jalen Nailor in the passing game. So I feel relatively comfortable about this for the Vikings against the Titans. I also felt pretty comfortable about the Vikings against the Jags next week, right? So it's football. Anything can happen in the NFL. Even guys who are maybe bottom of the roster players are closer to being true NFL starters than they are to most college players, right? So there's a little bit of there's a lot more parity in the NFL than maybe we make it seem with some of these teams' records. But I'm really hopeful that the Vikings can go into Nashville and beat the Titans because it's a game I'm going to be attending. I'm excited to go down. I've never been to Nashville before, so it was a good opportunity to both explore the city and go to the game. So, excited for it. Get to see it live. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap up this episode of Kindred Skulls. You can find me, Matt Freese, at Fries Football on Twitter. You can find my co-host, Nick Olson, at Nick Olson NFL. You can find Kindred Skulls at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. We're available on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Also have a YouTube channel. And with that, Skull Vikings.